everyone, and welcome to It Matters Radio's spoken word guest interview. My name is Monica Brinkman, if you haven't been with us before, and I'm the host of the show. But more important, I want to introduce you to Mr. Kenneth Weene, who does really all the hard work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to tell everyone that Ken is probably one of the best interviewers for spoken word or really any guest that I've ever met in my life. So it's such a pleasure to work with him, and I'm so glad to be here again with you, Ken. But I see there is
Compliments
a
get
lovely
every-
woman.
Yes. Okay, yes, we do have a very nice lady with us who lives in Virginia, and her name is Mary Clark.
See, I made him blush.
And Mary is the author of a novel called Miami Morning. She also has a book called Tally, An Intuitive Life, and an ebook called Covenant. And she is a very, this Tally, she is a very active lady, working in community organizations. She lived in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan, and
more stories.
but she grew up.
I bet.
Up in Florida, which is where most of Miami Morning is set, but not all of it. And she is very into things like poetry, the nature, philosophy, and all kinds of wonderful concerns about the world. And let me just tell you, you can find Mary Clark Books on Facebook, and you can find Literary Eyes on WordPress.com. That's her blog, Literary Eyes. And you can find her books, of course, on Amazon, and I believe they're also in Nook and Kindle. And are either of the full books on audio yet?
No.
No, well, they should be.
I have them on Audible. Yeah.
Okay, so Mary, what inspired you to write about Miami Morning, to write this story?
Okay, well, there were two things. One was a woman that I knew for many years, and she was kind of a role model for many people in our neighborhood in Hell's Kitchen, New York City. And she was very kind and generous, and she basically was the guardian angel of the local playground. And she also had a job at the New York Times. She was a very busy lady, but she always found time for people in the neighborhood who were in need. She actually did give the coat off her back to a man on the street, which I didn't approve of at the time. I told her, you need that too. But anyway, she helped a lot of the kids in the neighborhood just by being there and playing with them in the playground, keeping them safe. And she knew all the families, and they knew her. So she was a good friend of mine for about 22 years. And I wanted to write a novel with a woman character at the forefront, not for any political reasons, but I just felt that it was something that I could do and do well and needed to do to show what impact a woman like that could have on the world. So that was one inspiration, and the other was I was part of an online group, and they were very diverse. They had people in there who were professors and others who were disabled people, just trying to get by in regular jobs. And one works for Blind Vision Australia and is also a musician. And we just had wonderful discussions. And in those discussions, I discovered that I didn't really know much about lives of people with permanent disabilities.
Uh-huh.
And so those two things came together in Miami Morning,
Right.
along
So
with my other
you have
things.
a very kind and caring protagonist,
Right.
modeled after this woman. And
Right.
but your protagonist doesn't work for the New York Times.
She's a teacher,
Excuse me, guys. I'm sorry. I
but she.
caught a cold, so
I see.
Well, feels bad.
I'm gonna ruin your interview. No, I'm kidding. Excuse
So
me.
she's
No.
a teacher.
Yeah, she has a full-time job, which is quite demanding, but she also has her life in the community and her friends. So she's got a pretty full life. She doesn't have a significant other at the time the book starts.
Right. What does she teach?
She teaches social studies or social sciences.
Yeah, what level?
And that comes from her interest in just how people live together and how can we live together, how do we do that, and how can we do it better.
Now, was that a high school class or a middle school?
High school, yeah. Yeah, I was a substitute teacher for high school classes, and so I had a little bit of a feeling for that. You know.
Okay. So you decided to place her in this high school class, and it's a regular class. It's not a special ed class, right? But then she learned something about one of her students.
Right.
Could you tell us a little about this student?
Well, this is something that actually was one of the things I learned about when I was a substitute teacher, and that is that there were people in the classes who did have different disabilities, and how did the teachers deal with that? And some of them were much better at picking up on people having problems than others were, obviously, as in life. And so she sees that this one student who used to be doing well isn't doing as well. And she starts talking to him and he can't answer. And she realizes that he has a problem, and probably a hearing problem. And she goes to the nurse and school nurse and goes to the channels to report this. And he gets help. And then he comes back to her and asks her and tells her a little bit about what he's going through. You know, that he loves music and he doesn't want to lose that. And he's not sure what he's going to do. Is he going to be a disabled person now, or is he still going to be himself? You know, and so he basically asks her to be involved, and she has to do that, of course, within all the institutional legal structures, which she does. And she gets to know his family, and tries to help him make that transition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So one level of this book, a very crucial level of the book, is about a teacher, a caring teacher, who is trying to make a difference.
Right.
But it's a novel, it's not a polemic.
Right.
So you have other characters.
Right.
And your teacher, and Layla Payson is her name.
Right.
And Layla, she has other people in her life. What else is going on in her life?
Well, she has some good friends, and one of them was a fellow school teacher who lost his job and starts a new business during the time of this book, and he's almost her age, so it's quite a change in his life, and she has to consider what she can do to help. You know, she's really willing to help him with rent and food and so on if he needs it, but he says he wants to start a new business, and then she's not so sure she wants to invest in her friend's business, but he doesn't ask her to, and so she wonders, you know, just how far do you go in helping someone in that situation. But he is also gay and Jewish, and he lives in South Beach. He brings a whole different flavor, I think, to the book. He talks to her at some point. They're talking about disability rights, and he tells her about his background in gay rights and the things that he did when he was younger, and to fight for gay rights, and they still have the issue of adoption. I think that's been resolved in Florida, but I'm not sure for gay parents. But
I believe so.
yeah, and and then there's Carolyn, who's a friend of hers, who's a fellow school teacher, and she's someone who speaks her mind and is kind of a foil for Lila, who is much more diplomatic. And I have a lot of fun with her in the book. And then there's there's so many. Anyway,
there's an antagonist, isn't there? Sort of one of the guidance counselors.
Yes, there's a guidance counselor who she is working with on another case. In fact, there was a fight between two girls, and she's working with him on that and with those girls. And then Raul's case come along. He's the young student with the hearing disability impairment, and another guidance counselor, sort of the senior one there, kind of takes that case on and doesn't want Lila, or Layla, however you want to pronounce it, to be involved, and makes that clear. And Raul wants her to be involved. So it's a dilemma, and she has to sort of deal with that.
She has to negotiate her way through a world that doesn't always want her helping.
Right.
But she wants very much to help, and she cares very much about a number of people.
Right.
Now, part of the book takes place in South Africa, as I recall.
Right, yeah.
Now, how does that get involved there?
I'm not exactly sure. I have
From
been reading
Florida
books.
to South Africa.
I have been reading books about Africa, and I've been reading the McCall Smith books about Botswana, and the #1 ladies detective agency, and then I read some of the more serious books about Africa and what's going on there, including one by a fellow, I believe it was All Things That Matter Press author, who wrote about Africa. And so it was in my mind, and I thought, well, I want her to go to Africa. And I accomplished that.
So you took characters to Africa.
I took her to Africa, and it turned out to be South Africa. There's a couple of writers that I know online who live there. So I thought, I can run this book by them. I did run it by one of them, and she read it. Made some comments, and it was great. So, but I learned about South Africa, and it's not the same as being there, I know, but it's amazing what's online. Besides blogs and pictures, there are videos.
Is it safe to say, as you're talking about this, and as I listen to you, is it safe to say that while this book is a work of fiction, it really deeply reflects who you are? The kinds of things you care about?
I hope so. Yeah, I think so. That's the passion behind it,
Yeah. Now, your other book, Tally, it's called An Intuitive Life. I have the feeling I'm talking to an intuitive author.
Well, that's a long discussion on what intuition is, but yes, I think it's archaic, and we carry it within us, generations.
Archaic in the good sense, in the yogi.
Yeah, right. Yeah, ancient. Yeah. It continues, sort of almost with, beyond us. But anyway.
So, would you agree with me that you're an intuitive author?
I think so, because that's how I work. Yeah, I just kind of let the feel of it take me where I'm going to go.
Now,
consciously direct it.
Yeah, and in this intuitive process, characters seem to come along sometimes, at least when I'm writing, because I tend to be somewhat intuitive. Characters will suddenly kind of come along to enrich the story. And you have a character who kind of comes along in your book who we don't know much about. In fact, neither does Layla. Seems like she's kind of seeing this guy out of the corner of her eye. Could you talk a little about him?
Interesting.
There's two characters who come in who I just did not foresee at all. And one was Baruti, the occupational therapist in South Africa. And he's a very important person in her life. The other person is this man that she sees at various locations around Miami as she's going about her life. And once at a cafe, she's at the cafe in South Beach with Dove and Maria, who is a Cuban-American young woman. It's another character in the book. And she drives home and she sees this other man with a book, sitting at a cafe, and that sort of catches her eye. And then she sees him at an art gallery. And then she sees him in her playground when she's sitting there or working with the other ladies in the playground. And he seems to, he's still got that book, And she wonders who he is, and is he a professor? And then he realizes that he's leading a bird group, and is he an ornithologist? And what is he? She starts to get really interested, and eventually he comes into the playground, and I can't tell you.
No, we don't want to give no spoilers.
Don't want to give it away. No.
So, it seems to me that you have a model that you're offering about life, a value system, that you're really offering one, not only about caring and getting involved, but also very much about how a person grows, how a person, like your protagonist, expands and grows in her own life. And I thought that I'd like to ask you about that. Could you tell us a little bit about your notion of life, and particularly life as we get into the middle of it, and how we expand?
Right. Well, I think that's important, that you can't live in the past, in my opinion. You have to keep moving, into new things. And that keeps you alive in the sense of being fully alive, consciously enjoying and taking in, what life has to offer. And it's not always easy, and it does get harder as you get older. Everything gets more difficult, I've discovered.
Yeah, including putting your shoes on, but
I know. The time is
still have to keep expanding.
Yeah, bending over, that's a problem.
So, yeah, I was very struck. I guess what I struck me about it is, being from a psychology background, I was very struck that you were very Jungian. And I was wondering how much, it came up a little earlier, we used the word archetype. I was wondering how much Jung you had read or had influenced, or is it just simply something that has kind of permeated your life and you've kind of come to the same place?
It's interesting. I've been feeling existential lately, so I'm not sure but when I was younger, I did study psychology. I have a psychology major, bachelor's degree. And we did read Jung, and I read quite a bit of his work. I was very impressed by his work, And I think part of it is, what do we carry forward through generations, in our species, that is constant and yet mysterious. And so, quite a bit of Jung, yeah.
Do you think the stranger with the book, without any spoilers, do you think in a sense he represents that notion of the Jungian past coming forward? Do you think that at some level you've taken and externalize that quality of the human mind into him.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's certainly interesting way of thinking about it. There's always something new, and yet that it is a basic, in our lives, basically love, So I hadn't thought of that. I'll have to think about that.
See, but the point I want to make here to the audience, in a way, is, this isn't. It's never as simple when you're reading a good novel, such as Miami Morning. When you're reading a good novel, it should make you think about life, yourself, the world, meaning, things of that nature. If all you're doing is being entertained, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with a good read with lots of action or whatever. But when you're reading a really good novel, one that's worth putting on the shelf and maybe suggesting to other people, it should make your mind expand. It should make you be asking questions about yourself and about life. And with that little bit of editorializing on my part, Monica, I'd love to show the book trailer for Miami Morning. Mary Clark, our guest today's very fine novel.
Okay, sounds great, folks. Here we go, and we'll be back right after this to chat a little bit more with our wonderful guest, Mary Clark. Here you go. Enjoy.
Where's Ian? Looky dooky.
Hey, we have another guest with us today. This is a friend of Punky's, and I know, being a cat,
What he's looking
would
at.
rather be off doing something important like eating sardines.
Oh, beautiful.
But did
Salmon.
want to meet
Salmon.
That's everyone that you're looking for.
Salmon.
Tarzan is from New York City, right?
Yes. Yes, a storefront on 9th Avenue.
Yeah. And how from a rescue or something?
2nd Street.
Did you get him from a rescue?
Yeah. Yeah, he's 14 now.
Oh, he doesn't look 14. He looks like he's in great physical shape, ready to go at the world.
Too much.
Yeah.
I made this today, and I had to run after him.
Yeah. Well, animals fill our lives so nicely. I have to share with you a discussion I had the other day with a friend of mine, somebody you know, Monica. And she was saying that pets are dying off more quickly now. And that it is in some way to help to prepare us for dealing with the difficulties in the world. That it's their way of helping us prepare. Does that ring any kind of chord in your minds?
Wow. They're animals in general, species across the the world or cats and dogs?
She was talking about animals in general, but then also specifically about pets.
Right.
Cats, dogs, birds.
Well, I don't think that's their intention, actually. I don't think they're dying off to help us in some fashion, but the fact that they are dying off should be
Warning.
A great concern.
warning. I guess that's the way to put it, yeah.
I remember when they used to bring canaries down into coal mines, and
Right.
and if the canary died, it was warning there wasn't enough air, and you better get out of the mine. I have a feeling that it no longer is the coal mine; it's the whole environment that all of us.
Well, we have that in Southwest Virginia, and it isn't talked about very much here, but because there's such a lot of support for the coal industry.
Right.
But our air quality is about 5 out of 10.
Right.
And when I lived in Florida, it was 8, and 10 is excellent. And the difference is coal power plants, and it's the sulfur dioxide mostly.
Want to know something really bizarre?
But we had a lot of moderate days and some unhealthy days this summer.
Recently, I read a list of the worst polluters in the United States.
Right.
And number 5 on the list was the Navajo Indian Nation's power plant that they run. It's a coal plant. That people don't know. We have a huge coal deposit up on the Navajo Nation, and they burn it, and it's powering all the lights in Las Vegas.
Oh, yeah.
Boy, filth.
Well, could you
Well,
imagine coal? Yeah, how much coal does that take? It has to take an enormous amount.
Well, it's an enormous power plant, and it's not the only source of electricity up there, but it's one. And it's an enormous plant, and it just is a horrible, horrible polluter. Anyway, getting back to
We don't have much coal left here, and they're using the slag now. They're processing that. So, but it's not just that. It's just a way, as you were saying, it's all the stuff that we do and the way we live. Using all this electricity as we're doing right now. Everything here is car based. There's almost no mass transit. So.
Yeah. We have to become more mindful.
Yeah.
But then again, the other option, which seems to be the one most of us are following these days, is just losing our minds.
I thought I already lost mine, but I
Lost and found.
long time ago, yeah.
Go for it.
So, Mary, what are some of your other passions besides Tarzan and writing? What are some of your other passions in life?
Wow. Well, I'm a birder. Yeah. I got into that because of my mother and father, who are way beyond me. They have traveled to other countries to look at birds, And so I hope that in my book some of my sense of humor comes out about some of this stuff. Anyway, my father is not alive anymore, but my mother and I do go birding. And it's a way to get out in nature and enjoy clean, fresh air and good exercise and the beauty of nature. And we live not too far from the Blue Ridge.
Wonderful.
Mary, do you find that it's much more difficult now to find specific species of birds than it used to be?
Yes, the bird population is crashing. When I was growing up, or just 20 years ago, you'd see flocks and flocks of birds, red-winged blackbirds and so on, and they just don't see them anymore.
I know.
I saw a flock of 12 the other day, and 6 in our backyard, red-winged.
What is very, very awful, so many places people are poisoning, and whether it's inadvertent or not, they're poisoning the birds. And one of my rules whenever we've owned a home, right now we live in a condo, so I don't get to say, but we would not spray, we would not let the city spray our trees. And so our yard would become a haven.
Yeah.
And we would have these wonderful robins and cardinals and birds. We had one place we had
Those, yeah.
3/4 of an acre, but it just was filled with all these wonderful birds.
We worked hard to make our yard a habitat for birds, and we one of the great things about winter is not good here, but one of the good things is that we do have feeders out, and we see all sorts of birds in the winter. It keeps us occupied.
Yeah, a lot of people they forget that you do have to feed birds in the wintertime. There's many birds that don't fly south.
Right.
They stay here.
This is their south, actually, and they don't have, the trees and bushes they used to have that were bearing seeds and so on. So, yeah.
So you love birds. Now,
Okay. Yeah.
anything else before I ask you a hard question? Okay, enough softballs. Like what's happening to the animals, the little things like that. Let's talk about the word disability.
Okay.
Differently abled, as many people prefer.
Oh, yeah.
Have you yourself dealt with people who have been differently abled, or was this something that you just came to intuitively?
Well, as I said, I didn't know much about what it was like to be. I still don't know what it's like to be a person with a permanent disability, such as being blind or deaf or crippled, as they used to say, mobility impaired or wheelchair bound. And so that learning about that, it did open up, as I say, in a whole new world. And you understand more. I mean, first of all, that they're just people, obviously, like the rest of us, but they bring a special, I don't know how to say it exactly, apprehension of life to the rest of us that we don't have. And when, for instance, Ricky Sheplin, who's blind and a musician, talks about how he can still play music and how he gets around the world, you see, it's just new. It's just something I couldn't even imagine how he does it. And it's fascinating. So, yeah, as far as disabilities, my mother is hearing impaired, and she's pretty much deaf. I have another friend who can't hear well. That seems to be pretty common. And Tally, this person in this book, was named PJ or Paul Johnston. Mm-hmm. He was legally blind, and he didn't hear particularly well. He heard better than he saw, I guess. And he also had some mental health issues, as we would say today, but he thought it was just the way he was. So I definitely had about an 8-year relationship with him before he died, and that was an insight into a world as someone who saw the world differently, for sure.
Tally was based on a
real person. He was one of the last of the Bohemians in Greenwich Village, New York City, and he had come in 1920, with a little bit after the true heyday of Greenwich Village, when Edna St. Vincent Millay and all those were there. They had just left, but it was still Greenwich Village, and it was still the swinging lifestyle and poetry and cafes and so on, and a lot of hard work and so on, and he totally got into that. And he was a boy from Atlanta, Georgia, a very southern gentleman with a puritanical upbringing, and he went head over heels for this other lifestyle. And a very intellectual man. But he did have a breakdown in life. After that, he struggled to identify himself and who am I, and so he came up with these different identities, some of them female identities, and just wrote letters to back and forth, amongst these identities. So he called himself multiphrenic rather than schizophrenic.
Multi-frantic.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah. And he did have a sense of humor too, though he could be, at times he was a little, he could alienate you with his, he could be vulgar or just, I don't know, not nice. You know?
Sounds like a fascinating person to
He
know.
could get hysterical. He got hysterical, and then he would talk about hysteria and why he had gotten hysterical. So he constantly evaluated what was going on in his life and in his relationships with other people. So
That should be interesting to you, Ken.
Yeah, you like characters who are complex.
yeah, I think so. I don't know.
It's a good thing.
Oh yeah, makes a wonderful read. That's the difference between a great read and a good read.
One of the big things is to have characters who are worth knowing, not necessarily always liking. I mean, I don't know
It's like,
that they're always people you'd want to spend an evening with
Right.
in person, but they're wonderful to spend an evening with in the pages of a book.
that's true. There were times I did not go to see PJ. You know, I had enough, and then, but I would always go back. And he was, I forgot what I was going to say, but yeah.
Would he
Oh yes, he was someone worth knowing. Yes.
would he
That was-
change when he was? Let's say that you were visiting him or out with him somewhere or doing something. Would he change during any of that time?
He was in one of those originals. He was just who he was. Yeah.
Yeah, just unpredictable, I should say.
Yeah, he was predictable within the way he was, you know. Yeah, he's just
I think what Monica is trying to ask you is
Style.
he had different personalities.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And did those personalities change, like, over the course of an evening? Did he, like, all of a sudden go into a female persona? Or was it more...
Well, he had left that behind by the time I knew him.
Oh, okay.
They had moved on.
I see.
Drifted off, whatever. Yeah, but he would... And the Professor of Love, which he had been some years before, was pretty much over. Though he still would take on that persona from time to time. So,
Was he aware that he was taking on a persona?
like, not necessarily. He had gotten it so integrated, you know, so that he would talk about it like in the third person. You know, the Professor of Love is doing this, and the writer, and, you know, an hour later we'd be talking about the writer and what the writer was doing. So, yeah.
Very interesting.
He could get
So
outside
this,
of that.
folks, is
That's
is
really
Mary Black's second book, Tally, An Intuitive Life. That actually her first book. Her second one is Miami Morning.
right.
And there's also an e-book, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Covenant.
Covenant. Okay. Now, Mary, I just had an interesting thought in my mind. You choose to deal with characters like Tally and like Raoul, who are facing very real challenges in dealing with the world.
Right.
Okay. How do you see the world responding to people who have those kind of challenges? You see it as a benign world, a hostile world, an indifferent world? What is your perception of the world?
Well, all of those, but it's not as benign. Benign isn't necessarily a good word when you come to this either, because that's benign indifference springs to mind. I think there are people who intuitively, perhaps, can relate to people who have disabilities, and then there are people who, perhaps, for more. They could be conscious reasons, or they could be, as again, ancient reasons of fear. Don't know how to relate, and they just don't take the steps, to treat people with disabilities as if they were people just like themselves, and that there's a real barrier there, and I don't think we have crossed it in this country. And from the people I knew in that group were in Australia and England, and they would talk about that. Why is there that hesitation to speak to someone who's in a wheelchair, for instance? You know,
Why do you think there is that hesitation?
well, I mean, they were talking about it just being a sense of, a fear, that, first of all, there's the idea that the person is different because they look different, and there's something in the difference that meets the eye visually, and they can't, we don't know what to do with it, And then the other part is fear of being, like that themselves, I think,
And the way that people deal with those things, I mean, some people bully and some just make jest of it and laugh and ridicule.
Right. Well, I think that comes from the anxiety, the fear. There's just beat at it and try to get it away from you.
Well, if give the audience, and I would like to, one bit of advice. Now, you've known your character Kelly as a person. You certainly know Raoul as a character. Let me ask, what piece of advice would you give people on meeting somebody who is differently abled? Somebody seems to have a difficulty. What is your best piece of advice how to go forward?
Just talk to them as you would anyone else, about the weather, or what they're doing if they're at a social gathering or something, and just talk to them about what's going on there, and just relate to them as a human being.
You're so right, Mary, because being in the medical field, I meet many people who are different in many ways, and if I didn't approach them and start just to chat with them and have conversations, I would have missed out on so many delightful communications.
Right.
And that's what gets me, because it's not that these people they act like these people are stupid or something.
Right,
Have
exactly.
no intelligence. Oh, they absolutely have intelligence.
Ricky has said that people assume because he's blind, because he has these other problems, that he's also intellectually slow.
Yeah.
He's stupid. He's a very bright person.
And it's not so.
One of the things that struck me the other day in the news was a prominent political candidate who will go unnamed, referred to probably one of the most gifted actresses that I have ever seen, had the privilege of seeing on stage, who happens to be quite deaf, quite hearing impaired, is retarded. And I
heard that.
Yeah, and I was like, oh my God, how absolutely.
Well, that's
terrific.
That's the stereotype and the stigma and the whole thing that we need to overcome. And I really think that,
Well, I'm going to tell you my approach which is not to just act like they're just everyone else, because they're not. I know that. Like I have a very good friend here in town who's visually impaired.
Right.
And we go out for coffee, and I say to him, wait, I'll go get your coffee. Because I know that if he goes to get the coffee, not only is it a bigger problem for him,
Right.
but it will take time away from our being able to sit. So I say, look, I'll go get the coffee, and because
you take
it's faster.
you're not going to be blind to the disability that
Don't be blind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of people don't want to talk about it, and of course talk about it. It's
Right.
there.
Talk about it in the context of your relationship, not some abstract what's it like to be, but
Right.
I had another friend I haven't seen in years, but he was in grad school with me, and I would say, Jim, can I help you? And he'd say, yeah, he said, let me take your arm, and And now, sure, of course I, of
Did
course.
there was the right thing you asked. You asked first. You've got to do that. Don't just assume they can't do things for themselves.
But
So
also show that you're willing and that you're aware and that it is very second, and that's the other thing, that it is very secondary,
Hmm.
very secondary to the primary thing. And
right,
the primary thing is human relationship. And I
relationship.
don't care what a person's abilities or disabilities or different abilities are. In the end, we're all more nearly human than otherwise.
Well, there's the whole question of the fact. We all have some disability.
I
Some
you,
are
Oh,
I was just going to say that.
severe.
Yeah.
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 Some are more severe than others, and
Yeah.
that's about
Some
it.
some of us are even so disabled that we end up talking on radio shows. So, and what's worse is we get upstaged by a cat.
I know.
Folks, we have had the pleasure today of talking with Mary Clark. Now, there is a problem looking for, I'm going to always tell people, go look for Mary, for this author on Amazon.
Oh,
But there's a problem looking for Mary on Amazon. And
yes, I have.
it that there are so many, I'm like Kenneth Weene. I get this great thing. I have the only person with my name in the whole world.
Yeah,
that we
you're
found.
lucky. You're
Yes.
fortunate.
So, but Mary Clark is unfortunately not that lucky. So let's start with, first of all, if you're going to look for her books, and you should, pick a title and look for the title. And the book we've been talking about most today is Miami Morning. And that's easy to remember, Miami
There it
Morning.
is. Miami Morning.
Okay. And then you see what you do is on Amazon, her name will come up as the author. Click on the author and you'll get to her other books. See, that's the trick.
I do have an author page, but it is hard to get past Mary Higgins Clark.
Yes, it is. Now, also look for Mary Clark Books on Facebook and Literary Eyes on WordPress.com, which is her blog. And of course, you can also find the two books on her publisher's page, and that's All Things in That Press,
Correct.
which of course has got dear friends, and it published some of Monica and my books as well. And folks, please think about the questions that Mary's excellent books bring to mind, such as how to relate to the disabled, what happens to our lives in life, do we flower as humans, what are the archetypes within us, and all these wonderful questions that a good book makes you think about. And again, her name is Mary Clark, and I think what we're going to do today, Monica, if we can, is I believe we have a book trailer for Tally's Life.
Yes.
Tally, Intuitive Life. And I would love to show that to remind people to look for that book as well.
Yeah, and Mary, I have to personally thank you so much for writing these two books.
Okay.
They're the type of books, as Ken said, that I am passionate about because I like to have something where I'm going to talk to people about it and get into conversations with them. And like some books, they're just fun to read and that's it. But this is something that is going to stay with people for quite a while. And I know they'll be sharing it with others. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed this. It's wonderful. I'm glad to talk to you both. Let's do it again.
We shall.
Sure thing.
Keep in touch with us. So, folks, here you go for another glimpse at Tally. Bye-bye, Mary.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.